Hello, everybody. We're live. We have nobody watching because they probably tuned in at 7 and found no show. But I hope people will will start gathering in here to watch. We're waiting for Salim Mansour to join in. We had technical difficulties at the start of the podcast today. Um, I wasn't able to connect to my stream because during the week I had this crazy idea that I was going to start simulcasting to YouTube. I've been trying for a couple of months and didn't seem to work. So I got a friend of mine to help me, and we went through it all. And I noticed this little red thing flash up saying all platforms aren't connected. So I thought that just meant the YouTube, but it turned out that it kicked me out of the Rumble connection too. But we are now live.
We're live.
And it's
We're
now
live.
and we're just waiting for Salim to join us.
Yeah.
Matthew, please, I've got two of your books right here.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That's volume.
Struggle for Progress.
Yeah, right.
And this one here, Caught Between Two Worlds.
Oh, yeah, that's the scary one. Yeah.
Yes. And I've browsed them. I haven't had a chance to read them because I'm a truck driver, work Sunday to Thursday, and I'm online all the other time stuff.
Right.
But
yeah, I gotta make audiobooks. At some point I'll do that for you.
I watch a lot of your live streams with Canadian Patriot Press and everything. It's incredible the amount of knowledge you have. But what I like is you go beyond like this, the Wikipedia history, right? You go right into the back to where the to the esoteric beginnings of things and how everything seems to be connected that way. And today we were going to talk about the recognition of Palestine and what that means. But I wanted to quickly go through the history of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to start a screen share here.
Sure.
So a lot of this has to do. Start screen share.
Are you using this is like Rumble, right? That's streaming out? Okay. You're not using StreamYard or anything like that. It's direct Rumble?
It's not letting me share. Oh, that's I got to press presentation. There we go.
All right.
Yeah, I just go through the Rumble Studio when I first started this podcast a year and a half ago.
Okay.
I had my grandson, Salim and Mansur. Salim's still not here. That's weird. So anyway, I had my grandson and my daughter come over and set up OSB and all this stuff, and I just had no way. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out how to do the OSB and all the controls and everything. I had StreamYard, and I thought I'd use StreamYard too, but at the time, I was like, YouTube would never let me and the stuff I talk about on anyway. So I said, heck with it. And there was this Rumble Studio that set up, and I heard that Viva Fry was using it, and he was having no trouble streaming onto other platforms from Rumble Studio. So I said, geez, since I'm Rumble exclusive, whatever. And tonight it's definitely the Rumble exclusive because I'm not going to X or Facebook or YouTube because it won't let me because of technical issues. But anyway, so I just kept going, and I find Rumble Studio really interactive, and I like to use it, and I'm used to it now. So it's tough for me I want to switch to something else, but I may have to do that in the future to avoid this problem. So anyway, here we're going to be talking about Zionism now. I know you know something about it, but quickly, what is going on in the Middle East these days harkens back to basically, as Christian Zionists would like to say, it goes back 5,000 years, and some of the more zealous Zionist religious people in Israel, that type of people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and all that. It's all a religious thing, but actually Zionism started out as a secular movement, and it's a nationalism movement, and it was a reaction, of course, to the rampant anti-Semitism that was going on, and how they wanted to have their own country. Now, the problem, of course, of that, and is that there was already a Jewish presence in there. There was a Muslim presence and a Christian presence in Israel, right?
Yeah.
So to make it to turn a part of Israel, to turn Palestine, is what they talked about, into Israel, they early on realized that they would have to use coercive colonialist methods to do so. And that is where the problem starts. And I'm going to stop sharing that now because the Haskell, Theodor, Herzl, and modern Zionism. I want you to talk about that because you know about this, and maybe give the basic history of that, and what, and of course how it feeds into the Balfour Declaration and everything else. Just give us a quick history of that.
With okay. Yeah,
and I'm going to scream while you talk.
Sure, yeah, and context is super important, and I'm looking forward to chatting with Salim Mansour as well. He's somebody who I've respected for quite some time, and yeah, I was getting worried, I was getting scared when it wasn't looking like the first live stream attempt wasn't going to pan out. So I'm really happy that you've switched gears, and I have faith that Salim will pop on. But until he does, yeah, I'll satisfy this itch. There it is. There's Salim.
Hi.
Hey, Salim.
Hello.
Yeah, quickly to set up Salim is we were talking about the conflict of in the Middle East, of course, and the recent recognition of Palestine by some countries and stuff. But what we're going to now hear is Matthew's going to give a quick overview of where we are now and how it basically starts in the late 1800s, a secular idea of Israel with the Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl, and all that. And Matthew's going to give us a quick overview of that because he knows it. All right, thanks, Matt. Go for
it. Yeah, sure. I'll set up a little bit of context, and then we'll start piecing together some of the nitty gritty. And I'm really looking forward to Salim's take on this, or at least in terms of like world developments now. But as far as your question on Zionism, what led up to Theodor Herzl, I mean, one thing that's noteworthy is that Theodor Herzl, who's sort of one of the key godfather figures of what became the state of Israel, was himself an admirer of Cecil Rhodes and was writing letters to Cecil Rhodes expressing his admiration for how Rhodes was able to subdue the inferior races in Rhodesia, Angola, Zimbabwe, South Africa, this big chunk of terrain that Rhodes was himself known. He called himself a race patriot. And he had an idea of creating what's known as a Church of the British Empire. And that was sort of outlined in several manifestos that he had drafted and to which his funds were put to said use. I'm here speaking about the Rhodes Trust, which was a massive amount of money that he had extracted from his rape of Africa. Pretty much, I'll just say it that way. De Beers, Launer Ho, many of the big cartels that still run much of Africa's mineral resources today find their origins with Cecil Rhodes. And so this is the guy who Herzl, a follower of Nietzsche, gave his admiration to, not surprisingly in some ways. But I would say even if you want to go even deeper than that, Rhodes being he chose to call his secret society that he outlined the Round Table Movement as an homage to the mythical medieval crusader knighthood and the Grail romances that were big recruitment tools to get young idiots into quests that would then make them useful jackasses who would become knights, basically mercenaries, proto-Green Berets, in the clash of civilizations that were then known as the Crusades. There were several of them that pit, the Christian world against the Muslims, but also against the Jews, and in this tit for tat, forever war dynamic. And the propaganda tools in those days, they didn't have Hollywood, they didn't have like Ridley Scott's The Kingdom of Heaven like we have today to get people into a state of stupid. Instead, what they had were many fiction writers and like those sponsored by Eleanor Aquitaine and others who started coming up with these various Lancelot, Arthur and the Round Table movement things, which was part of a romanticization of becoming a mercenary knight killer. And it worked. It worked pretty well. And the Round Table concept, which had nothing to do with the original Arthur, or the original Arthur that lived in the 6th century, had nothing to do with the Arthur image that was projected by these fiction writers 6 centuries later. But this really did charm a big chunk of the British upper crust oligarchy and their Oxford-trained wannabe elites. Cecil Rhodes being just one of many. Lord Milner, who ran the Milner Kindergarten that became the controlling hand of the Rhodes Trust that created a Rhodes Scholarship program to brainwash young knights, young mercenaries in this new system of controlled indoctrination that would then be sent back to different parts of the world that they would then, work to advance Rhodes's vision. One of the aspects of Rhodes's plan was the infiltration and dismantling of America from within and the reabsorption of the United States back into the fold of a renewed British Empire. Another aspect of this, though, involved the Middle East. And there are figures like Charles Warren, who was Sir Charles Warren, another knight commander of the British Empire, who was assigned to create under the auspices or the patronage of King or then Prince Edward Albert, who became later on King Edward VII, the Palestinian Exploration Fund. And that was 1865 this was created. And the idea of this was to send out British anthropologists into the Middle East to map out different tribes, different, Bedouin tribes and other things, and figure out, just to create certain profiles of who is there. And ultimately, the objective was always, as Charles Warren himself said, and as Milner said, and as Leo Amory, another figure of the Round Table movement, a follower of Cecil Rhodes, had said, was to reestablish the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
And I want to quickly say that this, I've brought this up, it's called millennialism. When my research, I found out that it wasn't actually European Jews that first formed this idea. It was actually what you're talking about. It was British people that formed this idea of a place of Jewish homeland in the Middle East. Yeah. But they did it, of course, through their Christian lens. I just wanted to ask you about this called millennialism.
Yeah. That's extremely important because it's based upon an interpretation, an eschatological interpretation of certain biblical texts, but they also use a lot of Gnostic texts too. But they use, they put a lot of emphasis upon things like the last book of the New Testament, the book of the Apocalypse, basically. And there's this interpretation that God dispenses his will in the form of millennial dispensations, and at the end of every millennium, God, changes his character. And as that little thing pointed out, there was basically there was a Protestant movement before Luther, like a century or more before Luther. This already began, and the followers of Wycliffe, of Jan Hus, who created the Hussites, were promoters, innovators of this interpretation that started focusing that to be a Christian means you have to primarily focus on the end times. Right. On and building up your idea of what the end times means and interpreting the allegorical language within the Bible to conform to specifically what the end times will be. And then disputes would happen over, like, is it 1437 or 1345 because there's a dark age? Is this the end times? And how are we going to react to that? Or if anything, how are we going to stimulate it? How are we going to be, instruments of God's will? And so this played into what this guy named Darby, who was another British figure. I see Salim nodding.
He knows all about this.
Yeah. I'd say that Darby is the other aspect of this. So getting at what shape Postal, not Postal. So sorry, Theodor Postal. I don't know why I said that. Theodor Herzl.
Theodor Herzl.
Theodor Postal is the good guy. Herzl, was this medievalist crusader roundtable idea on the one hand, but also the type of religious spinning was being promoted by certain Freemasonic networks like the Earl of Shaftesbury, who was working with John Nelson Darby, the godson of Horatio Nelson of the Battle of Trafalgar, a very high-level British elitist, but who was also part of the Plymouth Brethren, a new spin-off cult that was set up in the 1830s. But I'm not going to throw in names. Anthony Morris was So all that to say, he created what's known as premillennial dispensationalism, added just more character, put a lot of emphasis on this idea that to usher in the end times, to bring in the Antichrist proclaimed in the Bible, we would have to get the Jews to all go back into the desert, recreate a promised state that was taken from the Jews, thousands of years ago. And so that became part of the recipe book to move move society in that certain direction. Yeah.
And now I want to go to Salim. Now, how does this play in with Theodor Herzl and his idea of a secular Jewish state in Europe? We have to say that anti-Semitism was a big part of it because there were pogroms in Russia and stuff. And when back in those days, when a European country or empire had a problem, they would look around for who to blame, and there's always a good minority there, the Jews. So in a way, there was kind of like an impetus for this to start. And so, how does that tie into the secular part of this Middle East of European Jews wanting to start a secular state in Israel?
Well, there are many threads, and Matthew was laying down the thread that goes through Cecil Rhodes and the moneyed people, who, in the case of Herzl, was introduced to Cecil Rhodes and others by this guy, William Heschler, who was the sort of a pastor and religious diplomat based in Vienna in the British Embassy. And it was William Heckler who basically identified Herzl as his man in spreading among the Jews the whole idea of what became Christian dispensationalism or Protestant dispensationalism in the beginning of 19th century, and then spread. So the dates we are coming to is the second half of the 19th century. 18th.
I'm still here. I just want I just wanted to make sure Salim was, so the crowd could see him really well. So I'm still here. I'm just in the background.
Okay. I don't want to take too much time because it is a subject that should be discussed on its own merit, I suppose. But I'll point out very quickly two things over here. While Cecil Rhodes, since Cecil Rhodes' name has come up, while Cecil Rhodes was introduced, among others, moneyed people in London. This is the time of Benjamin Disraeli and others. That is a dominant force in British politics. By William Heschler, Cecil Rhodes did not come up with the money for Herzl. He came up with the connection. He didn't give the money to Herzl, but he gave him a lot of connection. So I just wanted to put that on table. But the Africa aspect was there, and as we all know, that toward the end of the 19th century, the British government proposed Uganda and Kenya for the colonization of making a Jewish state, which was under discussion at I think it was the third Zionist conference in which Herzl participated. And it was thoroughly discussed, but then voted down. They wanted to go to Palestine, or that was their target. The second point I want to make is that before all of this comes together, it is the English, and it is the English Puritans who are at the heart of this movement. Long before Nelson Darby shows up, long before Earl of Shaftesbury shows up with his devotion to bring the Jews together and then take them to the Holy Land in preparation for the second coming of Jesus. So long before all of this, it is at the time of Oliver Cromwell, in the time of the English Revolution between the Catholics and the Protestants, that the argument emerged. And John Bunyan's Pilgrim Progress is one of the textbook of that argument. The argument began that the British or the English were the lost tribe of Israel, the 13th tribe.
The British Israelites.
Yeah. Exactly.
Is that why I've noticed when the king and the queen dress up or whatever, they have the Star of David as one of the jewelry items on their sashes?
Well, this is post Cromwell. I mean, this is a very interesting phase. We can get lost in the discussion, historical discussion, but I'm just pointing out that the English Revolution, which they call the Glorious Revolution, 1640s, 1649 was the execution of Charles I for being a man insistent on having the divine right of kings. And Cromwell had him executed, and he became the Lord Protector. And it was toward the end of Cromwell's reign as Lord Protector. He died. His son did not succeed him. His son did not accept being the Lord Protector. And then came the crisis of the Parliament and the question of the monarchy: who would be the head, who would be the sovereign. So that's a constitutional argument. Canada is very much wrapped in it, and we should have a discussion about that. That's why, in my view, Canada remains a vassal state. Canada never became a sovereign state, you know, and it continues to be a vassal state. And the Laurentian elite are very happy to be the vassal of the British, of the Anglo-American power, and of Zionists. So these are no coincidence. These are deeply structured into the English history, and this is why, in the period, as Matthew has written extensively about it, and I suppose has spoken about it, the role of the British through various ways to corrupt, subvert, and take over the American Revolution. The last great attempt was the Civil War, and the role of the British North America in that Civil War that not too many Canadians know about.
Oh.
So the point that I would like to emphasize here is people don't know, or they have forgotten, or they don't have an understanding of the English history, that it was the grandson of King John of Magna Carta, Edward II, who expelled the Jews from England in 1290. For the next 400 years, there would be no Jews in England.
Was that the Aziz laws?
Pardon me?
Was that the Aziz laws?
Edward II.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes.
Yeah, 1290.
Yeah.
Grandson, I think, of John. John was the brother of Richard the Lionheart,
Yeah.
And he was desperately wanting to raise money to follow Richard the Lionheart in the Third Crusade. And that was the deal of the Magna Carta, give the barons.
Yeah.
And the whole Magna Carta has been misrepresented as if it was a great charter of liberty. It was no such great charter of liberty. It was raising money for the Crusades. But the Jews were expelled. In fact, the first country to expel the Jews was England, which most people, again, don't remember. That happened 200 years before the Spanish king, Ferdinand and Isabella, expelled the Jews and the Moors from Spain in 1492. So then where comes in Cromwell? Cromwell is leading the Puritan revolutionaries, the Protestant. And it is Cromwell who desperately needs money. And where will the money come from in his war that is taking place in England, the Revolutionary War? The money will come from Amsterdam. And in Amsterdam are the Jewish bankers and the Jewish moneymen, people like Manasseh and others. And so they are going to give the money provided the ban is lifted. And the ban gets lifted. And that's a complex history. After lifting the ban, the parliament wants to have a monarch. Charles I's brother, Charles II, dies. He had become the king. He dies. But his children, he has only 2 daughters, and they are not in England. They are in Amsterdam. And one is married to William of Orange, the Elector of Orange, who's a Protestant, and of course financed by the Jews of Amsterdam. And Anne doesn't want to come back to England all by herself unless her husband comes. And so that's the deal that is made, where William of Orange and Anne comes back to England and becomes crowned as king by the Parliament, and becomes what later on would be called the dignified face of the Parliament. The effective face of the Parliament is the Parliament, and within the Parliament, the cabinet, and within the cabinet, the Prime Minister and his people. That's the effective face of the Parliament. And the crown is simply the figurehead, the face, as I said, the dignified face of the Parliament. So it is the Cromwells that lifted the ban on the Jews and brought them into England. And this is towards the end of the 17th century, 1680s, the Glorious Revolution that the British historian call it.
So now, can you draw that line to the Balfour Declaration? I know you're getting there.
Wait. I got a sub question before you do that. The idea of restoring of Jerusalem, of restoring Zion, these things like that were very prevalent in a lot of the writings of the Puritans of that age in both the Americas as well as during the Civil War in England. But I'm wondering, did it include as an idea the physical geography of Palestine in the Middle East, or was it more of the idea of thinking of London as Zion, or parts of the U.S. as the new Zion, or was it geographically centered in getting the Jews to the Middle East?
It is not that England was the Zion. The Zion would be the New World.
That was the new, right? That was the Baconian.
That's the Flower Pilgrims. They're going. That's the arrival into the New World. And again, you can see with the rise of the Mormons. Again, they are the same people looking for the Zion.
It's in Utah. Duh.
And interesting, Tommy Douglas, a famous Freemason who I grew up admiring, his biography is The Road to Jerusalem.
Did he think Ottawa was Jerusalem, or what did he think of it?
He would often say that to a lot, like Queen Elizabeth I herself said that she wanted to institute a new Jerusalem in Britain. So it's an idea that goes. It's not a physical place. It's wherever you are at the time, basically, right?
It is the ideal, the city on the hill, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's where I was wondering, because you have like these two conflicting ideas of how to interpret that concept, where on the one hand you have the city on the hill idea of, and then on the other hand you had it sort of co-opted and then used more geopolitically as a very specific location in an area of the world where these different civilizational forces meet in this pivot, Mackinder's sort of pivot in the world island, and it had to be there all, like, maybe it always had to be there by certain factions. But that's very different and very specific as far as convincing all the Jews to like uproot and go there and then be used for other geopolitical machinations. It's really different.
Yeah, there are dreamers, there are cranks, there are all sorts of people, who Earl of Shaftesbury himself was a crank, as was Nelson Darby, the Pilgrim Brethren, the very name Pilgrim Brethren, and so they were there. But the geopolitical construct only comes about in the middle of the 19th century and after. You might say the geopolitical construct and interest about Palestine or West Asia as the bridgehead for the British between India, the crown jewel of the British Empire, and Europe. That becomes formidable in terms of geopolitical calculation from the post Crimean War, that is the middle of the 19th century, and that you can see if you go back and look at both the literature, uh, writings of Benjamin Disraeli, for instance, Tancred and other novels that was written at that time. These are people, looking towards West Asia, towards Jerusalem, towards the Holy Land, not only from a religious point of view, but from that larger perspective of the British interests, in keeping uh, its rivals and adversaries. France was a formidable rival. I mean, Napoleon had arrived at that part of the world before the British, right?
Mm.
And he had a Zion plan too. When he called himself the protector of the Jews in 1798, he had a whole plan for recreating Solomon's temple and everything.
But he also had plans for leading the Muslims and the Arabs, the Mamluks.
Yeah.
He took a great interest in the Quran. He saw himself as another great warrior, some tradition like Saladin and so on. So
he saw himself as the great lawgiver, right?
Yeah, these are all part of the romance of
Yeah.
the East that is there in the minds of these people.
So I want to quickly get back to because I want to get to Theodor Herzl, and leading up to the Balfour Declaration.
The Theodor Herzl, as I pointed out, William Herschler, you all might want to check him out. William Herschler is the man in Vienna who spots Theodor Herzl and then takes Theodor Herzl under him. He becomes Theodor Herzl's mentor to introduce Herzl to the bigwigs in England, in London, where he takes him, and so on and so forth. Well, what is the backdrop in the mind? I mean, part of it is the same interests as Earl of Shaftesbury, Nelson Darby, and others to bring together the Jews, and the English is going to help them go back to their native land, biblically given to them, and so on and so forth. But behind that is their interest of England itself, and their interest of England is to land there and have their agents over there, that in the eventuality ultimately of some deal with the Ottoman Empire, or in a post-Ottoman Empire phase, if that comes about, England will have its hand over there. This is also the time when Benjamin Disraeli buys up the Suez Canal. I mean, it was the French who had built the Suez Canal, Ferdinand de Lesseps and others, with the grant given to them by the Khedive of Egypt, that was a satellite of the Ottoman Empire. And then Benjamin Disraeli made the strategic investment, and he bought the canal by putting the money down to the Khedive. So these are all part of the strategic geopolitical thinking of an empire that is spanning the globe. Is spanning Africa, is in the Caribbean, North America.
There's two things going here. Who's using who, right?
Pardon me?
There's the idea of like exactly who is using who in this situation, right?
Well, no, pause here. All of this is happening is with the moneyed people, and Herzl is an ambitious man. He wrote his the Jewish State in the 1890s after the Dreyfus trial. That's when he had his epiphany and he wrote his Jewish State. And he's looking for a way out. The people preceding Herzl are people like Moses Hess, Rome and Jerusalem. And there you have, if you read Moses Hess and you read Rome and Jerusalem, this is the old debate among the Jewish intellectuals and the rabbis, that Rome became the eternal city under in the Roman Empire, and then post in the Christian world with the Vatican. But Jerusalem is the ideal city. It is the counterpoint, and it is not only the counterpoint. It is sanctified by the biblical mythology around Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem, as Moses Hess conceives it, will be at some point in time the capital of the world, the spiritual center of the world, the navel of the world. And this is an idea that very quickly is taken up by the Protestant, not by the Catholics, by the Protestant. And the Jewish orthodoxy, the religious Jews, don't want to have anything to do with this, because for them it is only the coming of their Moshiach, their Messiah, that is going to legitimate the making of Israel in whatever shape the Mosaic brings it about. So for them, all of these activities of Herzl and others are simply, people who are engaged in a heresy, you know, and
Hmm.
they have nothing to do with this.
And we still have those, and those people are still around with us today. The Nudorite Kartai, for existence,
Well, they are
Orthodox Jews.
they're around today, but they are in the margin. They are in the
Yeah.
margin. And the other thing that you might want to put on the table right now in this discussion at this point, again, it is very complex, but need to be put on another variable. Like I said, there are so many threads out of which a Persian carpet is woven. So the thread is that the European Jews are not the Israelites. The European Jews have nothing to do. Now it can be proven with all the modern scientific tool that is available, nothing to do with the Holy Land, nothing to do with the Jews of the Bible, nothing to do with them. These are the Khazarian Jews, And so the eventual claim that they will make on the Holy Land towards the end of the 19th century with Herzl is again part and parcel of a colonial project. It has nothing to do. It is given the trappings of a religious and a holy venture, but there's nothing holy and holiness inside it. It is purely a colonial enterprise, a colonial settler state that is going to take place, and that is in the context of, as you're waiting for Balfour. Balfour is World War One. That is when the split takes place. The split means the empires. By the time the World War One comes in, there are 5 empires at play, and when the time World War One ends, all you're left with is basically Britain and France. And
So,
Britain,
and this is where I wanted to get to, because this is very important for people to understand. There's after World War One, of course, the Balfour Declaration was signed in 1917. But after World War One, there was quite the problem. I'm sure people have watched the story about Lawrence of Arabia, right? So at that time, they promised Palestine to both the Arabs and the Zionists. And I think that's the problem that we're dealing with, isn't it?
Hmm.
Go ahead. You go ahead, Matt. You take it up.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the way that Salim set this up is really it creates a lot of space, and I like that. I like having, because this is always we're dealing with things that are not mechanical, right? There's these living dynamics, and you got to create an appreciation for these historic forces in order to really zero in on some of the more interesting drama that gives value to explain why things happen in history that otherwise could not be explained properly. Like, oh, why did World War One happen? Some guy got, a duke got shot, an archduke got shot, and then everybody killed each other for 4 years. Stop asking questions. And it's like, well, wait a minute, there's more going on. So I like that, and I think what I would add as well as a bit of coloring. People know today of color revolutions. That's become part of our lexicon. They're not new. It's not a new phenomenon. The idea of weaponizing mobs, weaponizing tribal thinking in order to get a mass of people to destabilize a state that you want to subdue and conquer as a rival empire. That goes back a long ways. And I think that looking at the weakening of the Ottoman Empire during this period of the turn of the century, the value placed upon this area of Palestine, and all of the eschatological sort of religious engineering that was charging people up. Whole groupings of peoples were being charged up around different end times teleological, interpretations of their religious texts. All of this stuff comes into play, and I think that when you look at the role of people like Alexander Helfand, somebody who was himself tied very closely to a figure known as Leon Trotsky. They had themselves been co-revolutionaries in the first attempt to overthrow the Romanovs in 1905. Alexander Helfand becomes, an international financier, weapons like an arms dealer, an organizer of revolutions. He's working with the grandson of Giuseppe Mazzini, who's operating a young Ottoman lodge in Cyprus. And so he's organizing something that becomes the Balkan Wars. Like, so the lead up to the First World War involved the weakening, the softening up of Russia through both internal discord. These the first attempt at a proletariat uprising was one mushying effect that couldn't have happened were it not for things like the Protocols of Zion to be disseminated through the Russian ruling class, and especially targeting the figure of Nicholas II, who had certain susceptibilities to a certain way of thinking about conspiracies. He had certain advisors who were telling him, "Hey, fire your Jew-loving advisor Sergei Witte. Just fire him. You can't trust him. He's working with the Jews." And they're like, "Look, we have proof. The protocols. We've got proof." And it turns out this is a giant operation tied to British intelligence and the Okhrana and figures around Madame Blavatsky, like Helena, what's her name? Petrova, I forgot her name. One of Blavatsky's disciples. And you got a network of these guys who have penetrated deep into the Russian court. And it's proven later on that this whole thing is a giant forgery, but it works really well at convincing Nicholas to clamp down heavy, restore the pogroms. Like it's a pretty heavy clampdown. There's Christian villagers who are like deployed to go and do lynch mobs, like lynching of various evil Jews, which are pretty much just Jewish people in the pogroms. So it's getting really tense and ugly in Russia, especially. And that then creates, it's kind of like, imagine a U.S. government declaring domestic terrorists out of a leftist radical extremist group like Antifa, and all of a sudden justifying clamping down in ways that might do some damage. And then what do you find? Well, surprise, surprise, a lot more people who are disenfranchised, who felt victimized by the state. All of a sudden they were leaning left, but now they're full-blown extremists, right? And then that manifests into the next generation of reactionary that then justifies more clampdown and tit for tat, left versus right crap. We've seen the same thing in the Middle East. So that's sort of what Russia got played into. Witte was fired. And at the same time, on the periphery, you've got the Ottoman Empire, which is weakening itself. It's destabilizing left and right. Certain wars in 1912 occur in the Balkans. Weakens Russia, that expends Russia that way. They've got the Japanese that just also were helped out by Wall Street and London bankers to launch an attack on Russia as well, annihilated 80% of their navy. So Russia's just getting hammered. The Ottomans are getting hammered by internal destabilizations, expanding themselves. And you got promises, like RB was saying, you got promises being given to the Hashemites on the one hand by T. Lawrence. You got other promises being given by the British Arab desk reps to the House of Saud, saying, "Hey, you're going to be our guys. Just help us now with the uprising, and we'll give it to you." And then you got the Jews also being given all sorts of promises. And everybody's being given promises that don't work together. They're all contradictory, but people start moving in a way that is beneficial to destroying the Ottoman Empire from within. Right at the time that they were trying to modernize, there's networks in Germany and the Ottoman elites that were trying to work on the Berlin to Baghdad railway to help start an industrial progress and to help get some qualitative change going. That didn't happen. And so, you have this whole thing happening. And then in the midst of this chaos, you got Lord Milner and Leo Amory and Lloyd George, who are crafting, along with Walter Rothschild, a protocol for basically creating this future state of Israel. And that becomes the Balfour Accords. Lord Balfour is the key figure, but it's co-written. These letters, or this particular letter, is co-written. It's drafted. It's edited by Lord Milner, who plays a role. Lloyd George, who later on is known as the British Hitler. Like, he was going to be the guy who was writing letters to the Nazis in the 30s, saying, "If you come in now, I'll be your Nazi prime minister. I will work with you." He was a radical promoter, again, of the Protocols of Zion, as was as was Milner. Like, they were all promoting this stuff. So they found a usefulness. I just find it a rich irony that these hardcore anti-Semites and later on pro-Nazi fascists are also the ones who are so devoted to lovingly creating a homeland for the Jews because they just care so much. And it's like, no, there's other plans within plans and games within games at play that a lot of people who don't think like a sophisticated British imperialist, they missed it back then. And yeah, it's a tragedy. I just want to chime in with those variables.
All right. And Salim, you can take it from there. So now we've got the Balfour Declaration declared. And at the same time, these people start moving into Israel because they're getting all these backings of mass migrations from Russia, of course, and Europe, especially, and in Britain. So these new Jewish arrivals with this idea of forming a new a state of their own started arriving in after World War I in the 1920s, and they start using a thing that always seems to work is terrorism, the Stern Gang and other things. Please expand on that. We're now in the 1920s after the Balfour Declaration, and these diasporic Jews are deciding to come back to start the state of Israel. And how are they going to do it? I guess it's going to have to be through force, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the period between the two world wars is, again, a period of great confusion and distress, crises. There's the Great Depression. There's a rise of fascism. There is a whole issue of how to maintain and control the empires, both for the French, for the British. What one overlooks very often in many of these discussions is that while Britain made the promise through Balfour Declaration for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, I mean, the word is homeland, I mean, the British are the ultimate Shakespearean playwrights, There are no better
they're I think of them as the Iagos within the Shakespeare play.
Right. I mean, one reads Shakespeare, one needs to read Shakespeare and study Shakespeare to understand the English. There is no one better who understands the English than the Englishman Shakespeare. So their language is full of duplicity. The mannerism is full of deception.
Duplicitous Albion.
Yeah,
But perfidious Albion, Napoleon called them.
Absolutely. I mean, there are things that I suppose people who are gentlemen, and just for the sake of being a little provocative, I am a gentleman, and I hesitate to state things that would discomfort people. But let me put aside that mask of being a gentleman. The English are, after all, Anglican, the church that was created in the bed of an adulterer who kept sending his women to the Tower of London to be decapped. So this is what it is. I mean, the great Englishmen who tried to stop this adulterer and this murderer who made a church in his name were people like Sir Thomas More, who was beheaded, and others. So this is again. I mean, you read Richard III, you read Henry II, Henry IV, you read about Falstaff, you get a sense that in Shakespeare what sort of people we are dealing with, and nobody can understand them because the language, the mode of behavior is always so prim and proper that people take them at their word. But the word means nothing. The word means, as Alice in Wonderland, what I say is, when I say it, that's what I mean, So it is up to who is saying it and when it is being said and so on and so forth. And that's the story of the Middle East. But Middle East was a sideshow to the main show for the British, which was India. And we forget about that, In World War One, as the World War came to an end, the Indian National Congress and the Indian nationalist movement was sweeping across the subcontinent. or you might say a continent, and the British were, beleaguered. There was a unity among the Hindus and Muslim. Gandhi was leading what is called in Arabic or in Hindi Khilafat movement, that is support for Ottoman Empire, with his Muslim counterpart. And the British were very, very concerned about this because that could sweep across. Uh, uh, People forget that the British Army, both in World War One and in World War Two, a huge chunk of the British Army was made up of warriors from India.
That's true. In fact, they were probably some of their best shock troops.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I mean, for instance, in Palestine, or sorry, in the Middle East, in the Ottoman Empire, the provinces of Ottoman Empire, the British army that fought the Ottoman, most of them were made up of Indians and Indian recruits, Indian soldiers, whether they were going into the Euphratic Valley, into Baghdad, into Basra, or in the army with Allenby that conquered Jerusalem. Uh, you know, um, the Indian element was very, very significant and very, very large. Remember the famous battle, the Battle of Gallipoli, in which the Allies were defeated by the Ottoman. Well, who fought in the Battle of Gallipoli? That was the brainchild of Churchill. Well, Australians, New Zealanders, and Indians.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so that was the sideshow. I mean, the Palestine, the turbulence in India, and so the British were trying to handle both the situation. They had made a promise to the Jews about a homeland, and here you had the situation in India that would overflow into the Middle East, or could overflow into the Middle East, and therefore you had, I mean, Matthew mentioned several names: Leo Emery, of course, the Prime Minister, Lloyd George. Balfour signed the letter, Balfour Declaration, Lord Milner, the War Cabinet, that is, that voted for the Balfour Declaration that was discussed in the War Cabinet. But there was one man who did not vote, who in fact opposed it. He was the Secretary of State for India, and he was the only Jew in the cabinet, Lord Montagu. And Montagu was a Jew, and one should read his memorandum that he wrote to the Prime Minister and to Balfour, rejecting every single bit of argument about the Balfour Declaration. He raised the issue of double loyalty. He raised the issue of Jews as a religion and Jews as a nation. It was in the French Revolution, for instance, in the formation of the First National Assembly, that the French position on the Jews was everything in terms of liberty and fraternity and equality, everything to the Jews as an individual and nothing to the Jews as a nation. That whole issue is still alive. Are the Jews individuals? I am an individual. I am a Canadian of Indian origin, but I'm a Canadian. My children have been born here. I've been married here. This is my home. I don't have a double loyalty. you know of course, nobody can take the Indian aspect out of me, because that's my birth language, my love of Indian cuisine. As Donald Jeffrey says, he grew up in America, where the Italians and others brought the cuisine and gave them a new life in America from the potato and stew of the English. So, yeah, all of those are true, but we're talking about nation and people. And the French Revolution formulated that position. And that in the Balfour Declaration, Edwin Montagu is reminding that to whom? To his people around the table, the War Cabinet. The only Jew who rejected every single argument about this. So he was wearing the most important hat in the cabinet, the most important mean he was the Secretary of State for India. At the same time, he was a war cabinet member, and he saw the dangers in all of this thing, but he was overridden because of geopolitical calculation. You know, so anyhow, once the deed has been done, and the question about the permit granted to the people wanting to go to Palestine from Europe, that is the Jews of Europe, uh, going into Palestine, uh, then it would take on a life of its own. But on the other side of the story is, and Canada will become a factor over here in this 20-year period. So instead of spending too much time on the 20 years and all that was happening in Europe, we focus on the Jews and Canada and America and Australia and New Zealand. All of these countries closed the door to Jewish migration.
Mm-hmm.
When the Jews wanted to get out of Europe in this 20-year period, their place of choice to go was North America.
Like Miami and New York and Toronto and
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And that was closed.
yeah.
That closed after World War One. There was a moratorium on immigration in America. Of course, the depression was a factor that was cited, at that time. Same thing held true in Canada. But then comes a crisis with the election of Hitler and the Nazi Party to form the government in 1933, the very year that Roosevelt became the president. In January of 1933,
You're going to talk about the Havara Agreement.
well, there is the Havara Agreement that will
Yeah.
come out. I'm not going to talk about that, but there
Oh,
it is. You talk
okay.
about it, Matthew.
Okay. All
But
right.
for me, it is the migration issue where
Mm.
the President Roosevelt becomes president in March. His inauguration takes place. In those days, it would be in March. And Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany in January, And the famous headline in the Daily Express in London that the Judea has declared war on Germany. So it was the Judea that declared war on Germany, which has been written off the narrative.
Mhm.
The narrative is that Hitler started the drive to get rid of the Jews. Well, the Havara Agreement is being played out at that time. There are people among the German Jews who are quite predisposed to Hitler and willing to make agreements. But there's a conference called to deal with this problem. The Evian conference that Roosevelt called, Evian in France. And all the countries, all the European countries that are affected by what is happening in Europe are present. Canada is present. Australia and New Zealand is present. And there is no agreement. No agreement means no country wants to open the door to Jewish migration who are trying to flee from Europe. Footnote to that, in 1937, the conference took place. When Jawaharlal Nehru, who becomes the first prime minister of India, independent India, was one of the leaders of the Indian National Congress and the right-hand man of Mahatma Gandhi, was at that time in Europe. And he met with the press, and he told the press, when he was asked about the situation in the Evian conference, what would India do on this matter? And Nehru replied, well, we will welcome the Jews to come to India. If the Jews want to come to India, we will open the door to the Jews. We will be happy to have them. Mahatma Gandhi had long and deep relationship with many Jews in South Africa when he was in South Africa, and that relationship carried through into India. But immediately, the government of Neville Chamberlain came down, Lord Halifax came down and said, Jawaharlal Nehru doesn't speak for India. We speak for India. So he has no way to say that, Jews can go to India. So here is this thing. There is a pressure to get out. The Havara agreement that Matthew, you are talking about, is an agreement again between that Zionist element, pro-Nazi. Of course, the man who was most uh, connected to the Nazis and to the fascists was Jabotinsky, the revisionist Jews.
Hmm.
And Benjamin Netanyahu is a direct descendant of Jabotinsky.
Well, his dad was the personal secretary of Jabotinsky. Yeah.
Exactly. So here you have. I mean, if people talk about the Nazi connection and the Nazi aspect among the Zionists, then there it is: Jabotinsky to Benjamin Netanyahu's father, and Netanyahu himself. They were in league, and the agreement that they were trying to work out was Madagascar. But that fell through because the British would not let the Suez Canal be open to that traffic. So anyhow, we have a situation, and the situation becomes a factor today. Again, not too many Canadians remember this or will recall this, that Canada's longest serving Prime Minister, Prime Minister Mackenzie King, was responsible in keeping the door closed for the Jews to come to Canada in that period between 1933 and 1945, even as they saw what was happening. Mackenzie King went to visit Hitler in June of 1937, and I had a very, very cordial visit.
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that when I was in high school taking Canadian history. I was never told that.
Well, a lot of things you might not have been told, and that's the whole problem. History is not only written by the victors. History is not history because it is a narrative that you read, not history. History has to be corrected. Narrative has to be corrected by history, and history is not taught. History is not discussed. So anyhow, Mackenzie King was not alone in meeting with Hitler and having a very high opinion of Hitler. In fact, if I recall from my reading of Mackenzie King's diary, when he shook hands with Hitler, walked into his office and shook hands with Hitler, he carried gifts for Hitler. And one of the gifts was an album. And he very proudly displayed that album to Hitler, gave it to him. He said, you are from Berlin, and I am from Berlin. I was born in Berlin, Canada. And then he gives the story of Berlin, Canada, which is now Kitchener-Waterloo. And he was very impressed with Hitler. And he was not alone. The royal family, Edward VIII, King Edward VIII, was a very good friend of Hitler. People around him were very good friends of Hitler. Winston Churchill, in his book, The Great Contemporaries, published in 1935 or 36, had a whole chapter on Hitler, which was a very praiseworthy chapter of this man who had brought Germany from ruins back into this great, important position that Churchill was writing.
Yeah. He wrote that Britain should be lucky to have a man as strong as Hitler emerge in British soil. Yeah,
exactly. And maybe that too, my good friend RB was not taught in.
Nope.
Although, when you look at what Churchill did overseeing mass famine and genocide in India, you're like, well, maybe you were luckier than you thought, Churchill.
That's right. But coming back to Canada, and the recognition that, again, there are many threads over there. The recognition that was given this week in the UN General Assembly by Mike Carney, the Liberal Prime Minister, the two things should be juxtaposed and remembered. That in 1933 to 1945, Canada was a member of the Allied powers during the war. Canada had all the knowledge of what was happening in Europe. And yet Canada famously responded to the wishes and demands of the European Jews to get out of Europe by coming to Canada,
Mm.
with the famous statement of, I think, the director of Canadian Immigration Department, Mr. F.C. Blair, none is too many. None is too many was the policy of Mackenzie King government, you know.
Mm.
And so that is a stain that cannot be rubbed away, washed away. And now the connection. For 2 years, a genocide has been going on in Palestine. It is fully open. The Israelis under Netanyahu has been acting with impunity and has torn to shred every aspect of international law, treaty, agreements, conventions, the Geneva Convention, the Convention on Genocide, and so on and so forth. Plus, of course, the UN resolutions going all the way back to 181, 194, and then UN Security Council resolutions like 242, 338, and so on. They have torn and shredded it with the full complicity of the Americans, and so the Americans are party to the genocide. But then Canada is there too. There has been for 2 years not a whimper, not a word on the genocide. Everybody has tiptoed around it, despite the fact that Canada is a founding member of the UN. And Canada, without going into too much detail, has been at the heart of the Palestine issue, that is, Arab Israeli issue, since 1946, when Canada was nominated and elected to be a member of the United Nations Special Commission on Palestine, that came up with the recommendation, and I emphasize the word recommendation, the recommendation to partition Palestine. That was UN Resolution 181. And the Arab states at that time, there was no Palestine state, so the Arab states, the Arab League governments, they petitioned the International Court of Justice to question what authority did the United Nations have to partition the Palestine mandate. Remember, Balfour Declaration was for a homeland for the Jews. So the question of partition, where did it come from? And, what authority did the UN have? But the United Nations Special Commission on Palestine, with Canada on board, in fact, Canada casted the important vote on this matter to give that committee the majority on the question of partition. The man who represented Canada was the Supreme Court Justice Ivan Reed. Ivan Rand, has been therefore deeply involved in the issue of Palestine from that moment onward. And then, when unilaterally the Israeli David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of Palestine at the end of the mandate period, that was May 14, 1948, the ethnic cleansing by the Israelis or by the Jews was ongoing. The most horrendous destruction of villages and towns with Arab majority. One of them was Deir Yassin, that was done on April 9th, 1948, before the Palestine Mandate came to an end. And before the Palestine Mandate came to an end, the Jewish terrorist gang, the Irgun and the Stern gang, the Lehi gang, they were engaged in mass massacre, in shooting up villagers and ethnic cleansing. And they bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, where something like 96 or more people died, including British officers and British servicemen. And then when the United Nations sent in its envoy to look into the matter of the ethnic cleansing that was ongoing, um, I have Ilan Pape's book here. So let me just read a paragraph to put it into account. Nobody has.
Quickly, Salim, show people the book. Elon Poppy, a great Israeli historian, a Jew himself.
Just to give you the number to your audience, the number. This is once the decision was taken, that is the decision to go ahead with ethnic cleansing was taken. It took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods emptied of their inhabitants.
Wow.
800,000 people had been depopulated. 531 villages had been destroyed. I was in Israel. I've been to Israel a number of times, and Yad Vashem, which the Israelis take all their visiting heads of state and heads of government to go and lay wreaths. That is the memorial to the 6 million. That is built in the neighborhood of Der Yassin, that was destroyed by the Israelis, by the Haganah, and there you have it, and then it has been written off, erased from memory.
Mm-hmm.
So Canada has been there. When the ceasefire took place in 1949, after the Arab army withdrew, that had gone into Palestine to sort of save the Palestinians from the ethnic cleansing. When the ceasefire was imposed by the UN, um, the land that was taken remained. So what happened? The partition that was unilaterally imposed gave, prior to the partition vote, the Jews had 7% of the Palestinian land of the mandate, and the population was somewhere around about 200,000. The Palestinians owned and lived on 93% of the land.
Mm-hmm.
The partition flipped the number, flipped the proportionality. This 200,000, and the numbers were growing with the people coming in, were given over 55% of the land, and the Palestinians were given something like 45% of the land.
That was before the Nakba, right?
That is before. That's the UN resolution.
Yeah. Which is already unjust, and then the Nakba you have a war break out, and then all of a sudden the Nakba just obliterates what was already unjust, goes to the moon. Yeah,
exactly.
So
and so the man that I wanted to mention was the man who was sent to investigate all of this thing. Count Fogh Bernadotte of Norway was assassinated on arrival.
Wow.
The Lehi gang by Yitzhak Shamir, who would later on become the prime minister of Israel.
Which is doubly ironic because Count Bernadotte of Norway, during the World War II, he saved a lot of Jews from Hitler's grasp. He was a great hero of those.
That's amazingly ironic. And so you're saying that the assassin of this diplomat became later on
he was the head of the party. He was the head of
the party that carried out the kill.
Yeah.
Wow. That is an incredible.
So I'm going to quickly fast forward now to 1967. There's the war.
Well, can I just chime in with one thing first? Yeah, just to add a bit of coloring too, because again, we don't want to forget about Perfidious Albion. One of the things that I noted were that occurs as a bit of an irony is that we have the Irgun, the Haggadah, these various night brigades carrying out terrorist activity against civilian Arabs run by the Jabotinskyites, but in the same time, you have these radical groups that are ironically formed by British Freemasonic outfits that are tied to people like Haj Amin, the British appointed Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And it gets bigger. And the British really want this guy, not anybody else. They want that guy to be the voice and representation of the entire Islamic world. And most people in the Muslim world don't like him at all. Like, he failed the first vote. There's a certain like vote process. And then, after the various people living in and around Palestine who were part of this, I guess it was British Mandate Palestine at the time, at the end of the vote, the top 3 names then go up for a second vote, a second ballot. And I think the British have a role to play in selecting who they want from the 3. And he made it to number 4. He didn't even make it up until the 3. They had to kill a guy just to boost him up a little bit to make him legible. But then when he began promoting and working very closely with what's his name? Hassan al-Banna and the Muslim Brotherhood. And Hassan al-Banna is a guy who himself is like, working with the British Suez Company. He's kind of like a Al-Afghani kind of figure. He's always kind of in and out of British imperial networks. He seems to get a lot of support. He's providing this Muslim Brotherhood operation as an outgrowth of British Freemasonry in the Middle East. And then they're working together to carry out certain counterattacks or just attacks against settler communities. Like in 1920, you got the Nebi Musa riots. A bunch of Jews, innocent Jews, get murdered, and this involves some Orwellian propaganda, where all of a sudden everyone is encountering statements being made in pamphlets that are circulating all over the place that in a neighboring village the Jews just killed a bunch of innocent people. It didn't happen. That was propaganda, but it drives people crazy and it radicalizes them to become run by like mob mentality that then carry out days of riots that are permitted to be maintained. The British are they're the ones running. They could call in their troops. They choose to do nothing for several days to just accelerate to expand the damage. And then so they're playing both sides. And Haj Amin is a guy who's being invited to come to Nazi Germany. He's, meeting up with Hitler. There's all sorts of books that have been written. My wife wrote a whole book on Haj Amin and Hitler's relationship. And he's being appointed to he's being given German radio channels to broadcast the message to try to basically recruit as many Arabs as possible to the Nazi cause. And many do end up getting recruited, and they're disposable. The Nazis treat them like disposable garbage, going to fight the Russians. But you got this guy, and at the same time as you have these Nazi admiring figures who are kind of working with a common outcome. Let's just say it that way. I won't say they're working together. I won't say that Jabotinsky is working with Haj Amin, but let's just say that what they're doing as effects work towards pushing people in a certain direction. And then on top of that, another aspect of the Nazi thing is you have like Eichmann and Himmler, who Eichmann is teaching himself Hebrew in order to study Kabbalah, because he's a big believer, as is Himmler, who founds this new Templar order. The new Templars, it's a sort of tip of the hat. They're trying to hold on to the idea of what the Templars had as a Crusader Gnostic order in the medieval, the medieval era, whose headquarters was under Solomon's Temple in Solomon's Mines. And they had a whole idea of reconstructing Solomon's Temple as part of some millennial fantasy that they had. So you have these weird ideas based on the guys in the Nazi Party who are the driving force behind, in my mind. And they're working with a bunch of moneyed Jews. That's true. But they're a big ideological force behind the Havara Agreement, which even Zionist organizations today have to admit, if it wasn't for the Havara Agreement, Israel as we know it, it's hard to imagine how it would happen, because it provided funding and all of the means, right, for 70,000 or more.
Uh-oh, Matthew, you froze. Go ahead, Salim. Take over from there.
What has happened to Matthew?
He's frozen. He'll be back. It's probably just the But you go on from there, where he's talking about the Havar Agreement and the whole thing.
Well, whatever Matthew is discussing, a lot of it is about the confusion among the common people who are being threatened from all sides, uh, and in that confusion, the interests of the powerful um, makes its progress and achieves its end, as it happened
You're
with
back.
the petition of the UN resolution, UN Special Commission on Palestine
Right.
to partition Palestine. There was no agreement on that. It was simply pushed through. And here you have again. I mean, if you step back for a moment, you have this peculiar situation from the perspective of the British. The war ended in 1945, May. Churchill called for an election, which had to happen because it had been a coalition government during the war, a unity government. So Churchill had to call an election. An election was called 3 weeks later after the war ended, and Churchill was defeated. The great victor of the Second World War was reduced to an opposition leader, and Clement Attlee became the prime minister, uh, the labor leader, and his foreign secretary was Ernest Bevin. And both of them were completely different in their viewpoint from that of Churchill, who was the arch imperialist, apart from being the arch Zionist. The one of the very first decision, in fact, the most important decision, I would say, in terms of geopolitics, where Britain is concerned, was made by Clement Attlee, announcing that Britain would be withdrawing from India, giving it its independence within 2 years,
Mm.
and that was pulling the plug on everything, including Palestine. And Ernest Bevin announced that Britain would, at the end of the Palestine Mandate, which would be May of 1948, May 15, 1948, Britain would be handing it over to the United Nations. Okay, Britain was not, as the mandatory power. Britain was not saying to partition it. In fact, what was happening, if you understand the politics in Britain at that time, they were washing their hand like Pontius Pilate from the empire. They didn't want to carry the burden of the empire anymore. No British male member of Britain was ready to go into the empire to fight and defend the empire for the imperialists, whether it was Lloyd George, whether it was Leo Amery, whether it was Lord Milner, or whosoever, Churchill. They had had enough the 5 years of war. So the decision of the United Nations Special Commission on Palestine to partition had no basis in international law. And that was the move that the League of Arab States made to get the International Court of Justice to come down with this decision. But then the Zionists used military force to create the reality on the ground through ethnic cleansing. The question you might ask, well, where were the Arabs then? We supposedly had the army, but the Arab armies were controlled by the British and the French. The biggest and the strongest army, the Jordanian army, the army of the kingdom of Transjordania at that time, the Hashemite kingdom, was commanded by a British general who was known as Glubb Pasha. Same thing in Egypt. Same thing in Iraq. So, these armies were under the control of the British and the French. The French were in controlling Libya, Lebanon, and Syria. So there was, in effect, no cohesive understanding from the military side of the Arab interest or willingness to defend the Arab interests in Palestine, whereas the Zionists were ruthless.
And a quick aside: this is also the time after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was originally secret, but it came into public knowledge afterwards. That the British and French had basically drawn up all those lines that are Iraq and Iran, and they drew up these imaginary lines, and then they just placed their people in charge of these places, right?
Right. That's how Sykes-Picot was, by the way, during the World War One. It was a secret agreement between British and French during World War One, and then when the World War One ended, it was on those lines that the British and the French drew the boundaries, and therefore they took control of areas. So yes, so this is the complex situation within which, as Arthur Balfour stated at the end of World War One, at the end of World War One, when the League of Nations took over and handed the mandate to the British on Palestine, just as they did with Lebanon and Syria to the French, uh, there was the American Commission created by Woodrow Wilson called the King Crane Commission to go and investigate the opinion of the people on the ground in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria. And the King Crane Commission came back with the word that there was no support for a separate Jewish state in Palestine. Overwhelmingly, there was no support. To which Balfour then responded, it doesn't matter what is the opinion of 700,000 Arabs. It is for us to decide what is at stake and how we should proceed. So it was the empire making the decision, you see, not the League of Nations. But then in 1945, with the conservative government, the Tory government, the imperialist government having fallen, the Labour government was washing its hands off. The Labour
Yeah.
government does not want any more of these things. And so the question that keeps hanging now, which has resurfaced, and this is what I was trying to come to bring this matter to the sort of an understanding where we are today with the recognition of Palestine, the global South and the BRICS nation are of one mind. That is, 80% of the world population are of one mind. As I wrote in a paper that was published in UN's Review, in the second year of the genocide, the line dividing the world between North and South now runs through the heart of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is the dividing line. And so the global South is 80% and more of the people. They are with Palestine. They stand with Palestine and they want to see justice done in Palestine. It is the global north that is where the chicanery, the expediency, the hypocrisy, the deception is involved. That's why I pointed out that in 1933, 1945, the King government in Canada responded to the crisis in Europe by saying to the Jews, none is too many.
Mm.
And then, following October 7, 2023, with the genocide that began and is still carrying on, Canada, who is a signatory to almost all the major decisions on Palestine, the former Prime Minister of Canada, Lester Pearson, won his Nobel Prize on the grounds of the conflict emanating in the Middle East around Palestine during the Suez Canal crisis. And then all the other major decisions of the UN, like the UN Security Council Vote 242 in November 1967, following the 67 war, was chaired by George Ignatieff, He was the president on the occasion that the vote was taking place, 15-0. That is the mother of all the resolution, UN Security Council Resolution 242.
Okay, and I want to quickly say, because I wanted to come to that. That's 1967. That's when the idea of a two-state solution really comes into fruition, right? There has to be a two-state solution. There has to be an Israel alongside Palestine. So that wouldn't happen.
The two-state solution is the resolution that followed the recommendation by the United States Special Council on Palestine, that is
Okay.
UN Resolution 181.
Okay.
The UN resolution, the Security Council Resolution 242, the major point of that is the inadmissibility of acquisition of land through war.
Yeah. Okay.
You see?
But it's going on anyway, right? Right to
But
this point.
so
So
all of
us, Canada recognizing Palestine, or UK or France, or anybody recognizing Palestine as a state doesn't come with any way of enforcing it at all.
what let us again, three of us are Canadian,
Yeah.
we know that Britain is the Albion perfidy, and so here's the country of Balfour Declaration now under Keir Starmer is giving a recognition. But what does that recognition mean has to be dissected. With Canada, we have been a player, not that we have been a bystander on this matter. We have been a player. So let us move forward on this matter, starting with 1946, United Nations Special Commission on Palestine, where Canada was present through the ceasefire line and the monitoring of ceasefire and the making of peacekeeping forces with a Canadian general, General E.L.M. Burns, who was the first general that led the peacekeeping forces in the Middle East, in Israel and in the Sinai. By the way, the Israelis would not allow the uh, blue beret peacekeepers on their side of the boundary. It was always on the Arab side. So the Israelis have never recognized and conceded to the UN peacekeeping mission. Then I want to hit two more things on this matter where Canada has been instrumental. Once the Cold War was over, we saw the making of genocides take place. Rwanda genocide, for instance. Out of Rwanda genocide comes the whole notion of R2P, responsibility to protect. Well, who took the responsibility to get that R2P on the UN table and voted on and adopted? It was Canada. It was Prime Minister Jacques Chrétien who responded to Kofi Annan's challenge of the millennium of how to deal with the problem of genocide, how to, interfere, that means taking troops into a situation of genocide. Now, it was Canada that did that, so we are a player. We did it. The second other important thing is that since the 1945 Nuremberg trial, the world lacked a court to try crimes against humanity, to hold people and government accountable. Well, that was brought to a consummation with the Rome Treaty and the making of the International Criminal Court. Well, the final act of the Rome Treaty was concluded by Canada. Again, Jean Chrétien and Lloyd Axworthy, because we came up with the money and with the tools and with the personnel in 1998 when the Europeans were lagging behind and Canada put the ball across the line. And the very first president of the Tribunal of 18 Justices of the International Criminal Court that was elected, the first president was a Canadian, Mr. Kirsch. Okay, so here we have all of the instrument in which Canada has played a leading role. And then comes the test, when the rubber hits the road, a total silence, a complicity with the genocide, instead of standing up and saying, we will follow the International Criminal Court decision. We will arrest the people who have been indicted and upon whom an arrest warrant has been set. Forget about the French, forget about the British, forget about anybody else, because they're all signatories. The European Union is a signatory. And yet, you saw Isaac Herzl only 2 weeks ago in London. Nobody touched him. Nobody held him. He has been indicted. He's on the arrest warrant, the president of Israel, by the International Criminal Court. So, just to wrap this up, it is good that these people finally says that, yes, there is a Palestine state and we will recognize it. But they have not stepped forward to say what will be the enforcement mechanism. There is no enforcement mechanism that they have voted upon. It is the Global South that is calling for an enforcement mechanism. And the man who has distinguished himself on this matter is the president of Colombia, Mr. Pedro, who has said, let us call for uniting for peace resolution in which there will be no veto possible. And let us put boots on the ground. And he says, I'm ready to be a member to go put boots on the ground. The Indonesian president has said, we are going to supply 20,000 boots on the ground once we have this resolution. So it is for us to now see whether the global north will only walk the walk and be inexpedient and again speak with a forked tongue, or whether they will stand together with the global south, with the BRICS nation, and bring about, the enforcement mechanism to resolve this issue.
Okay, so before I throw it back to Matt, I just want to quickly say that the Colombian president has now had his visa revoked. He's not allowed back in the United States.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that just happened because of what the Colombian president just said. So we have a conflict of events here, and so I want to, before I throw it to Matthew. So what you're saying, Salim, is that if anything does, like this could be the flashpoint that these Christian Zionists want. After all, World War III starting because the global South is going to finally put their foot down, and the global North will back Israel, which will lead to this grand apocalypse, this Armageddon that these Christian Zionists want so much to fulfill their prophecy. Do you see my problems that these Christian Zionists have so much power in our political structure, especially in the United States? So I wanted to quickly play you guys something. Then, and after that, Matthew, I want you to expound on this, because I think this is where we're at, and it scares the hell out of me every night. What keeps me awake at night is this. This is just 6 minutes long. I just want to indulge me. Then afterwards, you guys can talk about this, and then we'll sign off for the night because we've gone an hour and a half or so. But thank you for your patience in this. Sure. But this is very, very important, and I think people exactly what's going on.
Go for it.
Oh, I got to turn the volume.
You have to turn on the volume helps.
In the Bible, and guess what? That just happened.
As Israel and Iran exchanged hostilities in the Middle East, U.S. Christian evangelicals began interpreting the escalation within the framework of an Abrahamic end times prophecy.
The Gog-Magog army is Russia, Iran, and several others that are going to join in the attack of Israel.
This is Pastor John Hagee, an influential pro-Israel lobbyist.
Can I get you guys to disable your cameras for a sec?
Oh, yeah, sure.
See the text on the bottom so people can follow along.
You got to press on the little camera icon at the bottom of your screen. It's okay. People they're probably listening to this.
Never mind, Salim.
In the U.S., describing Russia, Iran, and several Muslim countries as part of a biblical Gog and Magog army that has waged war on Israel.
Praying a prayer of confession of sin is a lot better than allowing the Antichrist to cut your head off.
Hagi is also the founder of Christian Friends of Israel, a 10 million member pro-Israel lobbying group that calls for public support for the state of Israel. Their lobbying efforts emboldened former US President Donald Trump to move the US Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem in 2018.
And we moved the capital of Israel to Jerusalem. That's for the evangelicals. You know, it's amazing with that. The evangelicals are more excited about that than Jewish people. It's really, right? It's incredible.
Since Israel launched its ongoing war on Palestine's Gaza, CUFI has mobilized a public relations campaign to support Tel Aviv and has raised over $2 million for Israeli charities. Following Tehran's retaliatory strikes on Israel, Hagi also called for an escalation in attacks on Iran.
We are on the verge of the Gog-Magog war that Ezekiel described in chapters 38 and 39. This attack by Iran, who launched more than 200 missiles yesterday, is a tribute to the weak and pathetic leadership of Joe Biden.
Gog and Magog appear in all three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In Christian tradition, they symbolize nations that will ally with Satan against God at the end of time. In the Holy Quran, they are mentioned as Yajuj and Majuj, two powerful barbaric tribes restrained by a wall. Their appearance signifies the end of times. In Judaism, however, Gog is described as a leader and Magog is his land. They are associated with apocalyptic prophecies where they will battle against the forces of good and will be defeated by God. According to some interpretations of the text, this battle will then precipitate the coming of the Messiah. Evangelicals believe that the current Israel-Palestine conflict is part of the prophetic events leading up to the end times that will bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ.
If you listen closely, you can hear the footsteps of Messiah. Get ready! Get ready! Get ready!
Soon after tensions between Iran and Israel escalated, American evangelicals began drumming up support for the State of Israel, which since October last year has killed over 34,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. The group interprets passages from the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, as promising blessings to those who support Israel and curses to those who oppose it. This apocalyptic belief shapes their political views and motivates them to lobby for Israel's interests. Over the decades, Christian evangelicals have played a significant role in shaping U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict. They form a significant voting bloc within the Republican Party, and politicians who seek their support often adopt a pro-Israel stance, viewing Israel's success as crucial for the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy they subscribe to. Currently, more than 100 members of U.S. Congress can be identified as evangelical. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu often glorifies them to galvanize their support.
When I say we have no greater friends than the many, many millions of Christian supporters of Israel in the United States and also in other parts of the world, I mean it.
Even though Christian evangelicals are calling for an all-out war with Iran, they also acknowledge the contributions of the King of Persia and the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great, who in 538 BCE allowed Jewish people to return from Babylon to Jerusalem. Cyrus was, and is, revered by Jews as a God-sent figure. Fast forward to the time of the pro-West monarch of Iran, the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who maintained friendly diplomatic ties with Tel Aviv. During his reign, Israel was one of Iran's main arms suppliers. In 1950, Iran recognized Israel. However, after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the Shah was dethroned and Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini assumed power. Tehran began to view Israel as the occupier of Palestine, and its relationship with Tel Aviv turned hostile. This was followed by the severance of Iran's commercial and diplomatic ties with Tel Aviv and the withdrawal of its recognition of the State of Israel.
American evangelical church in freefall.
In 2006, almost a quarter of the US population identified as white evangelicals. However, the movement is now facing a crisis of its own. By 2020, evangelicals had dwindled to only 14.5% of the population. According to a 2021 survey by the University of North Carolina and Pembroke, support for Israel dropped from 75% to 34% between 2018 and 2021 among young evangelicals. The survey also found that nearly 45% of younger evangelical Christians are supportive of the establishment of a Palestinian state. As support for Israel declines among evangelicals in the US, is their appetite for an apocalypse dwindling, or will it push the Middle East towards the precipice of a catastrophic war?
All right, Matthew, you can come in here. So, what worries me so much about this, of course, I got to stop sharing the screen. I thought I did.
Oh no, I put a screen share on, but that's okay. That screen share was my fault, right there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did
Go
that.
ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead and talk about that.
Well, yeah, and this is sort of the dark, ominous cloud kind of hanging over this extremely important briefing that we just received from the professor, because despite all of the how this is what kills me, right? It kills all. It makes me melancholic, but it's so important to keep the mind focused on this issue of the insane ideology within a faction that used to be a fringe, quacky faction within Judaism, within the radical Zionist movement, that increasingly became more and more hegemonic, especially after the 6-Day War, of the followers of a certain esoteric branch of Judaism that followed the teachings of people like, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the first appointed Ashkenaz rabbi of British Mandate Palestine, again, who had made a very big point that the purpose of being a Jew in his mind, and he didn't have a lot of Jews who liked him. Most Jews, just like Haj Amin and the Muslims, most Muslims did not like Haj Amin. But yet the British wanted him, this guy in his particular version of Islam, to represent the greater faith, because Islamicism was much more useful, much more predictable, had a certain eschatology that made it much more weaponizable than the moderate, reasonable groups that were the majority, and I think still are the majority within the Islamic world. And the same thing for the Jewish world. Most Jews just wanted to live a happy, good life. They preferred to interpret the idea of Zion as being something much more rooted in a allegorical moral lesson that, to be the first means, like Moses Mendelssohn, often tried to teach people that to be the first, the chosen people, means you have to be the most moral, the most just, the most abiding by your conscience, the city on a hill idea. Much healthier. And I think, even though Ben Gurion had a lot of tons of major racist problems, the guy had big problems, he still had the wits to know that you got to live with the Arabs at the end of the day. You got to find a way to build economic development with them. And that's why he called Jabotinsky Vladimir Hitler. He recognized that there was something toxic and self-destructive within this other thing that was being baked up within these different schools that were promoting the Rabbi Kook idea. And part of what they have in their mind, they've had with this Third Temple cult that's been baked in for a while. And I brought up earlier on the name of Charles Warren, and who headed up the Palestinian Exploration Fund, which set the stage for later Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Accords. But Charles Warren made a big deal about the need to rebuild Solomon's Temple to usher in some new age, some idea of some purgative, violent moment that would help to alchemically transform and create a new human species, baked into his geopolitical idea of a renewed Church of the British Empire. And so right now, this is from a headline where they announced back in July that one of the red heifers, I think there's 4 of them that were purchased by Israel and brought into to Israel earlier this year, maybe last year. One of them was sacrificed in a practice round, which accompanies the idea that, a red heifer that has no hair that isn't red on its body, but such a heifer has to be sacrificed. I think it's burned alive or something in a ritual that will accompany the destruction of the Temple Mount, a very holy site for Muslims, and on that very same site, the rebuilding of the third Temple of Solomon. And this guy Rabbi Cook here, I'll stop the screen share. Or can you stop the screen share? You can take it down.
I can't.
I won't go through it. I was going to scroll through it, but it's not necessary. But the fact that this has already been done,
I can't take it down. You'll have.
Oh, you can't take it down? Here, I'll just close the screen. Here, I'll just do that. There we go. This guy that I cited, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, he was a Kabbalist, like Eichmann, like the ironically leading Nazi, was a Kabbalist. And in the sense that he believed in a certain secret teaching, a secret interpretation that would only be passed down orally since Moses. And this is basically like a game of telephone. It's very easy to just make shit up. And there's other aspects of Kabbalah that are more complex, but that's just one element of it. But he said in the last book that he published called the Ehret, that's still studied in yeshivas, sorry. He writes, and I quote him from this because I think it's so useful. In 1935, he wrote, "The truth concerning the land is revealed in Kabbalah. Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, militates for life in the land of Israel. Rationalistic approaches to Judaism place no special value on the land in Israel." So it's a blood and soil cult thing. He basically wants the Jewish identity to be rooted physically in the land, and don't think about it so much. Don't try to use your reason. That's not spiritual. It's you got to make it a blood and soil thing. And then he says, here is where it gets really crazy. In wars, national characters crystallize. Israel, as the universal reflection of mankind, benefits thereby. The heels of Messiah follow upon world conflagration. At the hour of the downfall of Western civilization, Israel is called upon to fulfill its divine mission by providing the spiritual basis for a new world order. And that's just me quoting directly from this guy's book. So you got people, and he's influential. This guy's really influential. It's crazy how I mean, you could say a lot of the key figures that took power in Israel after 1967 were followers of this guy. The most radical illegal settler movements study this guy. And then you listen to, the Darbyites, the people who follow the Schofield Bible. Schofield was a Christian evangelical figure, but who was a follower of John Nelson Darby and used Darby's interpretation of the Bible in order to spin his own reading manuals of how to study the Bible with his own commentaries that would be in favor of interpreting things in Thessalonians and other places as what Darby said would be the rapture, where the good Christians who have made Jesus Christ their personal Lord and Savior will be zapped up right before this period of tribulation when the Antichrist will emerge. Everyone else suffers. People will be given this. It gets very complex. The amount of detail that these guys infused into their reading of very allegorical scripture is quite astounding. But, and then, you'll get the Antichrist ruling for 1,000 years in some interpretations. Some cases he gets put down right away. But in all cases, a bunch of good Christians basically get evaporated, go to space, go to heaven. And it really was sold to especially American Christians. This is not so much of an issue in British or European Christian communities. It's really a Canadian American phenomenon more than anything else. But they really want this. And especially in a time of economic crisis, when people are feeling very hopeless, they feel a lot of fear about the future. There's not a lot of sense of security. They get more inclined to this type of wishful thinking that, I don't have to pay my bills. I don't have to worry or anything. Bring on the rapture, bring on Gog and Magog. And you hear John Hagee, who's again, very influential, championing the idea of accelerating this end times thing. I got a quote here that a friend of mine sent this to me from George Bush talking to Jacques Chirac in his 500 days speech right after he started the bombing of Iraq. And he said, "Jacques, you and I share a common faith. You're a Roman Catholic. I am Methodist, but we are both Christians committed to the teachings of the Bible." Sounds good so far, right? No. Next day, he goes on. "We share one common Lord. Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. Biblical prophecies are being fulfilled. this confrontation is willed by God, who wants to use this conflict to erase his people's enemies before a new age begins. That's fucking George Bush, you know? Like, I'm not trying to say that George Bush was making decisions, but the fact that the guy who was signing off on things, executive orders, Patriot Acts, bombing campaigns, had that in his head, should cause anybody serious to have goosebumps that like can poke an eye out. And sure enough, you know, like if you look at it right now, that there is no country in the world that is insane enough to have adopted something like the Samson Doctrine, except Israel. They did that. They got nuclear weapons. I don't know how many. Maybe Salim, you know, I don't know, 200, maybe more. I don't know, but they're there, and they've got a doctrine that they somehow formulated after the 6-Day War that calls for using them if they feel at any point that their existence, whoever interprets what that means even, is going to be threatened, including striking allies with nuclear weapons.
I'd also like to bring up the Hannibal Directive, which they put into place on October 7th.
And then you got that, yeah.
So they are willing to sacrifice their own people for the greater good. The ends justify the means to these religious extremists, whether they be Jewish, whether they be Christian, or whether they be Islamic, because they have the same problem in the madrasas in Saudi Arabia funded by the United States to fight the Soviet Union. They turn these Islamic kids they brainwash them into believing in the you know, sacrificing yourself, being a martyr, you go to heaven for the 33 virgins. It's a common theme throughout all these Abrahamic religions, this extremism that is being pushed on the world right now by the people who want this new world order. And they look at this, I think, as a depopulation plan more than anything else.
I don't know how
their needs. It suits their economic realities. Of they want to be the masters of the universe and have a whole bunch of serfs serving them because they can't stand this middle class. It seems to get in the way of their plans all the time.
Well, it seems like a very complex bomb that has to be diffused. And I don't know. I try sometimes to vicariously put myself in the position of somebody, you know, it's like if I was Xi Jinping or if I was somebody with, you know, political influence having to deal directly with that part of the world, how would I try to navigate this? And it's complex. And, you know, I respect the president of Colombia's position, moral position. It's very good. But at the same time, I'm like, it's a tough one. There's so many Gordian knots, and it's like this is a very complex bomb where if you clip on the wrong wire, this could possibly usher in a major global cataclysm with so many chain reactions. Now, I know as well that there's people with the idea in their mind that maybe the Shah can be restored. The Shah, you know, as an institution can be brought back. We know that Reza Shah Pahlavi's son is a useful idiot who's got certain ambitions to, you know, be the new man to replace the Ayatollah and to replace the Iranian government in the context of a regime change. The Iranians don't like him by and large, so it's pretty dreamy. But the fact that that's the intention to fund him, you know, I saw him recently on the pictures of him at the Wailing Wall. He's definitely the preferred candidate as far as bringing back this Zoroastrian or whatever pre-Zoroastrian imagery of Cyrus as the friend of the Jews in the building of the first temple or second temple. There's this sort of mythology, this mystique that's been built up that's also in play. And to what degree is Iran secure? I don't know. I mean, I follow a lot of pro-multipolar geopolitical analysts and news outlets, and they give a very confident message that you know, Iran, Russia, China, they're stronger than ever. I don't know that. I'm not sold on that. I know on the other hand, I've got Douglas McGregor giving his hypotheses that Iran is at danger of a ground invasion by Israel. That doesn't seem too likely either on the opposite extreme. But a big chunk of the Iranian qualified leadership was executed during that weird 12-day war. Like a lot of very qualified people in Iran were killed. The Lebanese leadership, Hezbollah's leadership, was decapitated brutally. The Yemeni, you know, president, I forget, but you know, there was the execution of a big chunk of the Iranian government, the Yemeni government on top of that. we see that these are things that are happening. The former prime minister or president of Iran was assassinated just a year ago with the defense minister in a helicopter right next to Azerbaijan. So there are these things that cause me to wonder how secure the situation is, and is it possible that some people believe that it is their duty to do whatever they can to accelerate some cataclysmic end times? Are there people in Israel who are insane enough to think that it's their job to usher in some global conflagration so that the Messiah can come for the first time instead of the Christian Zionists who believe they're bringing him back for the second time? Yeah, I think that there are. So I wish I had more of a solution. Mad respect to the diplomats out there who are actually navigating this in a way that isn't accelerating an end time scenario. I don't know if a global police force under the UN or under some Soros funded. I mean, that's my problem with the ICC is it's also got a warrant out on Putin's arrest. I'm like, I don't know if that's the way to go either.
Well, the only people the ICC arrests were people in the Balkans and people in Africa and the Filipinos. A Philippine guy. They never go after the big fish because they have no enforcement mechanism. And of course, the U.S. has the Invade Hague plan, which if any of their leaders ever get indicted by the ICC, they're allowed to invade the Hague. So I mean,
it's a lot of this on Trump. Like, I mean, Trump, if he really wanted to, he's in the best position to do something. As far as cutting off the supplies to Israel, to like really doing something, it would be through him. I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's got the will or mindset to do anything useful on that.
He's a Shabbos goy. Honest God, he will do whatever Israel tells him.
It's not looking good. I mean, I've got friends who interpret, that are hoping that there's back channel animosity between Trump and Bibi, and maybe
they've been hoping for 12 years.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm not that confident about that hypothesis. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I'm sorry. I don't want to end it on a sad note.
No, I just wanted to let everybody know
where started on it.
Before we go to Salim for the last word, Matthew, where can people find you? I'm running your scroll up above.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think my Substack is pretty good. MatthewEhret.substack.com. or risingtidefoundation.net. You could also, I write for Pluralia, geopolitical magazine based in Italy. So my writing can be found on there. I do some shows beyond geopolitics and breaking history a couple times a week. So there's all that stuff. But go to my Substack. You can get most of these things in your inbox.
And go to YouTube and subscribe to Canadian Patriot Press also.
Oh, that too. Yes. Thank you, RB.
All right. Well, thank you for your closing there, Matt. And switching over to Salim. Salim, Matthew doesn't seem, and I'm like Matthew. I can't see a solution beyond a total insanity because these people have done it before. They've had a World War I. They've had a World War II. Albert Pike wrote about it in his doctrine.
Oh, actually, he didn't. That was a forgery in the 1940s. The Pike forecast of prophecy. They slipped that in there in the 40s in the Freemasonic, I forget, the vertical archives in Washington. They slipped it in to the Mazzini papers with Pike. I think they did it. I think somebody did it to try to delegitimize the very real Pike-Mazzini correspondences, which do talk about some very important things. Yeah. But if it's kind of like the Protocols of Zion. If they slept it in, they could just poop in the punch bowl.
Since one part of it is a forgery. Yes, since one part of it is a forgery, it's all a forgery. But Albert Pike and people like that in these esoteric Freemason circles often talk about a World War III because they figure that would be a good way to bring about their new world order. So their whole thing is ordo ab chaos, which is Latin for order out of chaos. They thrive by chaos, right? So they love to foment it and they want to take advantage of it. So Salim, final word to you. Do you think the Global South can actually have the power to non-violently suppress some kind of horrible thing in the Middle East and actually bring about some kind of justice? Or are you like me and Matt, you can't see how that could happen right now because of the power that the Christian Zionist lobby has, that the Israeli money people have, that the people in Europe, the British Empire types that are so invested in the Middle East, like the United Arab Emirates and Dubai and Saudi Arabia, if you watch an English football game, all the teams are owned by Arab princes, So what is there any hope at all? What do you think, Salim?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about hope, um, what is there to hope in the most fundamental sense? What is there to hope? At the end of the Cold War, the hope was there will be a peace dividend. There will be, a shift away from what had been the primary concern of the global powers, particularly the two military superpower. But one military superpower, imploded. That is Soviet Union. And what came about was not peace dividend, but unipolarity and hegemony by a country that was officially founded upon the idea of a republic run on the basis of the consent of the governed, a constitutional arrangement. And all of that was thrown aside. Everything was derailed, you know, and here we are, you know, at at the precipice of what many fear, quite correctly, that there might be a bigger conflagration about to take place. Okay, so where is the hope? There is no hope in that sense. But as, again, thinking, rational human being, we are in so many different ways. We might come from different points of the world and be Canadian, but if we take into account who we are the progeny of the age of enlightenment. That means the idea of reason, rationality, enlightened thinking, and so on and so forth. We construct the world the best way that we, in our fallible circumstances, have in mind for the benefit of all. And that was what the United Nations was meant to be. You know, whether we fully agree with, you know, the leadership at that time. 8 years later, we are revising much of that history. However, the content of the United Nations, the principles enunciated in the Charter, and all the various other conventions that together makes up the UN system was the articulation of the best that we can do given our limitation, our fallibility, and so on and so forth. And then the very people who constructed that have violated it and trashed it. Whereas the people who were not independent at that time, who were colonized, who were brutally ruled, the 500 years of the Eurocentric age that begins with Columbus and ends with the Cold War was a 500 or half a millennium of exploitation, of genocide, of plunder, of extortion. All right? Those people whom Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth are the people who now look to the principles of the United Nations as a way out for themselves and also for the other. And what I find so ironic, this is nothing personal between you and me and Matt, but what I find so ironic, for instance, the Canadian, let me just talk about the Canadians. They line up from one end to the other. The Conrad Blacks of this world, the shills of the Zionists, the extortionists, the deceptionists, the frog-tongued people in our universities, in our mainstream media, in our parliament, all lined up to trash and abuse the United Nations because it no longer serves their purpose that they could manipulate. On one hand, the very principles which try to be, within the context, as I said, of the age of enlightenment, universal. And then these very people, the Conrad Blacks I come back to, the Irvin Cutlers, the Mark Carneys and Justin Trudeau's and Brian Mulroney's and the whole gang of them, and our editors, and our presidents of the universities. I don't find anyone standing up and saying, we should have lived by the very principles that we articulated. That there cannot be two types of people, as Pedro spoke about at the UN, the chosen people, the exceptional people, the Americans and the Jews. We are all exceptional, we are all chosen, or we are all nothing of that. Where is that voice, my brother, from within Canada? So we despair, we throw up our hands, instead of saying, we are the ones who were the architects of R2P. We are the ones who put our money behind the Rome Statute. Why are we not then implementing them?
I mean, Tony Blair was a big, big pioneer behind R2P as well, and Blair had his own. I mean, I agree with you. I like the UN Charter. The UN Charter is very good. I like the UN Charter.
The biggest con man in the world in the 20th century was Winston Churchill, for heaven's sake. If we now go back and revise the understanding of Second World War.
Yeah,
sure. This man was the biggest grifter. Yeah. Bill Clinton's and others have followed him in his footsteps.
Yes.
You talked about Rhodes. The who's who in Canada are all Rhodes scholars.
Yeah.
So that's that's
look on them. Look, I would always tell my students, English is not my native language, but I speak English, I dream English. This is the language of Shakespeare. It is my language now because of 200 years of British rule. Well, I know what Britain did to India, but I also know what the good also that Britain did. So it is always a mix. And it is part of our rationality, our reason, our capacity to discriminate, to dissect, to analyze, to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yes.
And if we cannot do that, then let's not pretend to be, academics, scholars, intellectuals. We are nothing.
Well, I just really hope, the point of the Wretched of the Earth that you made is really good in the sense that I do have a lot of hope that those countries that had been abused by colonialism now have the strength economically to really carry real weight and lead in a serious reform of the UN such that the thing could serve the purpose and intention that FDR and company actually intended for it when the articles were originally drafted, which are great articles, super good. And if some fight could reform it back to its proper intention, sure. Then the mandate of heaven is there, and I'm for that. But I just don't know. Like I said, I wouldn't jump to it too quickly if there might be certain Tony Blairists and Fabians setting the stage for a trap too.
But let you be the Canadian to speak about that, because for 80 years the United Nations has been shafted by the very people whose ancestors, whose grandparents, who were called the greatest generation, built it. All right, and we are not yet ready to give 80 days to China, which is a 5,000-year-old civilization that has not made war on anybody.
Yeah.
That is now showing by its activity what that civilization means. Give them the chance, the honor, the respect, instead of what I see happening in Canada. The smearing and the vilification of the Chinese, of the Russian, of the Muslims, and so on and so forth. Whose interest does this serve? I can only see the interest that it serves are the interests of the chosen people, for whom each one of us are Amaleks, Goyim.
Yeah, like I said, my big concern is that the Jews have been set up in order to be a sacrificial offering at the end, at some end times Gog Magog ritual to bring about some new age of humankind that is very dystopic and bad. So that's just my concern. But I hope I'm wrong, and I hope more constructive ideas that you're advocating are able to cut through these traps and actually bring about a positive outcome. I certainly hope that.
Well, look, why can't we, all of us, be discriminating. All Jews are not Zionists.
Sure.
I mean, you know, I would always take my hat off for Chomsky, and there are many, many others. The voices from inside Israel, people like Israel Shahak, who's gone, but their companions are around. The Ilan Papes, the Mika Perez,
Gideon Levy,
the Gideon Levy.
and here
So
where I learned where
they
I
are yearning for the same thing that you
Yes, they
and
are.
I are yearning.
Some
But
of
they
my
are in
my
the most
what I've learned, the people
situation.
I would just wanted to quickly say, Salim, the people that I lean on the most in my understanding what's going on in Israel and Palestine are Jewish people like Max Blumenthal,
Max Blumenthal.
or the Do Dissident
Yep.
boys, Keaton Weiss and Russell Dobular, or Katie Helper, or Aaron Mate, or his father Gabor Mate. There are tons and tons of them. Jewish Voices for Peace,
That's right.
Medea Benjamin. They're the best examples of being an anti-Zionist, but also being Jewish, is right there to follow. So I really hope there is some hope for the future, because I'm as a Christian, I just want everybody to remember that there's the two most important things to remember about being a Christian is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the other is to understand what Jesus' message was love your neighbor as yourself. And he also said that the meek shall inherit the earth. So these people who are these warmongers, these self-appointed people who are accelerating this war so they can bring about their glorious ideological religious insanity, are the ones that I think are going to be surprised in the end, because those who live by the sword die by the sword. Yeah. And I think this would be a good time to leave us. So Salim, quickly, where can we find you? I'm just going to run your scroll.
Thank you so much.
So you work.
Yeah, it's Substacks. It's Salim Mansour.
Yeah. Salim.
Right.
Yes.
So it's running up above, and you can also find him on Twitter at Salim Mansour 26. It's running up above.
Yes,
do follow him. If you want to get some real good context and idea of the historical imperative that we are now facing. Salim Mansour is a much follow, as well as Matthew. And so next week I'll have another great show, and I hope I won't have the technical difficulties. But once again, thank you for all showing up here. Do support me, like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Substack. You'll find RB Ham on Substack too. And until next week, remember, conventional wisdom is often just conventional deception. If you really want to get to the truth, sometimes you just have to go beyond the pale. Bye, everybody. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night. All right, guys. Thanks. Hope. I think next Saturday I'm going to be having my old friend Beata Van Berkem, the tinfoil hat lady, on. And we're going to talk about her new book. So I hope you guys will show up again next Saturday for another issue of episode of Beyond the Pale. This has been a long one tonight, 2 hours and 17 minutes. I might have set a record, but when Salim and Matt start discussing this stuff, it gets so interesting, and it goes down. And like they said. The narrative often has to be corrected by history, because what you're taught in schools, the mainstream way of teaching you about these things, is very limiting. So if you really want to dive deep into this stuff, this is what you got to do. You got to really have one of these long form conversations. So thank you, Elbow Kid, for showing up. Thank you, all the contributors tonight in the chat. Greg Hume, of course, and everybody else. Thank you. And please keep supporting me. Come back next Saturday. I promise another really provocative show. Like I said, if you really want to get to the truth, you got to go beyond the pale. So thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you later. And I'll let Jesse Jet play us out.
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days and to still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to make, but God, it's so hard to save. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe? Were you you safe? Were you safe? Were you safe? I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to make, but God, it's so hard to say. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe? Were you safe? Were you safe?
Fresh off the masses, the brand new cancerous growth, who has come here to vie for your vote. Come here to cry at the camps and to mourn at the shore for the bodies that float by the wreck of an immigrant boat. Then it's back to their luxury home, couple security booths and a moat. Couple cigars, little escargot, little booze and a soak. Just breathe in the steam and the smoke. Pink salt, lavender, candles are low. Shit, when you do what you do, gotta lighten the load. And he got a life of his own that's a sight to behold. And it's a lot to control, to decipher the code or to siphon the soul. The cost of a good night's sleep for the working elite is a bargain, no matter the toll. Worth any wager, and that comes straight from the mouth of the means to the goal that will swallow us whole. Ripe for the picking if you don't mind mold, and you know I don't. Maybe we're pleasantly prone, maybe we're taking a licking, compliantly ticking and ticking and ticking, but never explode. No, I don't deliver the prettiest image, but damn if it isn't an accurate vision of natural fission, of rage at the system and abject heartbreak, patiently waiting for any who'll listen. That little blue bird who was watching your words is a federal carrier pigeon, a Langley first. It's a patient observer who hears what it wants and is trained for the worst. Oh, you got nothing to hide. They'll be the ones to decide that after they root through your purse, after they read all your text, after they raid your apartment, confiscate all of its contents, then conjure up evidence out of the air on a wing and a prayer and malicious intelligence nonsense. Any presumption of innocence long since gone, right along with your comforts and constants. Historically first they will come for the communists. So why in the fuck would I say I'm a communist? Well, it might be I love my community more than the monsters of opulence who are holding us hostage, who are vomiting promises. Might be I'm all done seeing our pensions and benefits harvested. Might be I'm all done watching the populace being disarmed in the guise of an armistice. Watching a woman collapse on the floor who will rise no more. She is wheeled out the door and you're next in line for the pharmacist. If you can get me to vote, it's a hard no confidence. But part of the charm of deception is politics wearing the mask of incompetence. It's all in the art of austerity, darling. It's all in the slide of the providence. Until home is as wide as your cubicle height and is only as deep as your coffin is. Maybe I'm miles away from impatience, aching to break off the head of the snake where the capital lust, reptile brain, and the margin of profit is. Like off with his. Like off with his.
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to make, but God, it's so hard to save. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe?